The snow fell steadily on the deserted streets of downtown Boston as David Matthews walked slowly back to his car after yet another late evening at the office. At 42, he had built a successful consulting firm that allowed him to provide well for his 10-year-old son Nathan, but the demands of single parenthood and business ownership left little time for rest, especially during the busy pre-holiday season. Christmas Eve should have been spent at home with Nathan, but a last-minute crisis with a major client had required David's personal attention. His housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, had agreed to stay late with Nathan, ensuring he would not be alone on this special evening. But David felt the familiar weight of guilt that accompanied his frequent absences. The alley behind his office building was dimly lit, illuminated only by the warm glow of Christmas lights from nearby shop windows and the pale street lamps that cast long shadows on the snow-covered pavement. David was mentally reviewing his to-do list for the following week when something caught his eye near the dumpster. At first, he thought it was just another bag of refuse, but as he looked more closely, he realized with shock that it was a small child, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, huddled against the cold brick wall. The little girl was using flattened cardboard boxes as makeshift bedding and had wrapped herself in what appeared to be an adult-sized coat that was far too large for her small frame. David's heart clenched as he approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. In the soft light, he could see that she had dark hair that hung in tangled strands around her face, and her clothes, though dirty and ill-fitting, suggested that she had not always lived on the streets. "Hello there," David said, gently crouching down to her level. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" The little girl's eyes opened, and she looked at him with a mixture of wariness and exhaustion. She did not speak, but David could see that she was shivering despite the oversized coat. "My name is David," he continued in the same soft tone he used with Nathan when his son was upset or frightened. "It is very cold out here. Are you all alone?" The child nodded slowly, her small hands pulling the coat more tightly around herself. David noticed that her lips had a bluish tint, and her breathing produced visible puffs in the frigid air. "What is your name?" David asked, his mind racing through options for how to help this child safely and appropriately. "Emma," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Emma, that is a beautiful name," David said warmly. "Emma, I am very worried about you being out here in the cold. Do you have somewhere warm you can go?" Emma shook her head, and David saw tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Can you tell me about your family, Emma? Are your parents looking for you?" The little girl's expression crumpled, and she began to cry quietly. "Mama went to heaven last week," she said through her tears. "The mean man said I could not stay in our house anymore because Mama could not pay the money." David felt his heart break as he began to understand the situation. This child had recently lost her mother and had apparently been evicted, leaving her with nowhere to go on Christmas Eve. "Emma, I want to help you," David said carefully. "But first we need to make sure you are safe and warm. Would it be okay if I called some people who can help find you a place to stay tonight?" Emma looked at him with frightened eyes. "Will they take me away to a scary place?" David thought of his own son waiting at home, probably excited about Christmas morning despite David's absence. The idea of any child spending Christmas Eve alone and cold was unbearable. "I promise you that I will not let anyone take you somewhere scary," David said with conviction. "But we need to get you warm and fed, and we need to find people who can help make sure you have a safe place to live." He paused, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "Emma, would you like to come to my house tonight? My son Nathan is there, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, makes the best hot chocolate you have ever tasted. Tomorrow we can figure out the best way to help you, but tonight you should be warm and safe." Emma studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. David carefully helped her to her feet, noting how thin and frail she felt. He wrapped his own coat around her small shoulders and guided her gently toward his car. During the drive home, Emma remained mostly quiet, but David learned that she was 7 years old, that her mother had died after a long illness, and that they had been living in a small apartment until the landlord had forced Emma to leave. She had been on the streets for 3 days, surviving on scraps from restaurant dumpsters and sleeping wherever she could find shelter. When they arrived at David's house, Mrs. Rodriguez took one look at the small, bedraggled child and immediately went into protective mode. Within minutes, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table wrapped in a warm blanket, sipping hot soup, while Mrs. Rodriguez heated water for a bath. Nathan, initially curious about their unexpected guest, quickly warmed to Emma's quiet presence. He showed her his room, offered to share his toys, and insisted that she should have some of his Christmas cookies that Mrs. Rodriguez had made earlier in the day. "Dad," Nathan said quietly as David tucked him into bed later that evening, "Emma does not have any Christmas presents, does she?" "No, son, she does not," David replied honestly. Nathan was quiet for a moment, then said with the generous heart that made David so proud, "Can she have some of mine? I have more than I need, and she does not have anything." David felt tears prick his eyes as he looked at his son's earnest face. "That is very kind of you, Nathan. I think Emma would appreciate that very much." Over the following days, as David worked with social services to find Emma appropriate placement and support, he learned more about her situation. Her mother had indeed died without any family support system, and Emma had been too frightened to seek help from authorities, fearing the foster care system based on scary stories she had heard from other homeless individuals. But Emma's case, worker Mrs. Chen quickly recognized that this was a child who had been well cared for and loved before tragedy struck. Emma was intelligent, well-mannered, and despite her recent trauma, showed remarkable resilience and hope. "Mr. Matthews," Mrs. Chen said during one of their meetings, "Emma has formed a strong attachment to you and Nathan. Have you considered the possibility of becoming her foster parent with an eye toward eventual adoption?" David had been thinking about exactly that possibility, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel both more real and more daunting. "I want what is best for Emma," he said carefully, "but I am a single father with a demanding business. Would that be fair to her?" "You have already shown her more stability and care in 1 week than she has experienced in months," Mrs. Cheney replied. "And Nathan clearly adores her. Sometimes families are formed not by biology, but by circumstances that bring the right people together at exactly the right time." 6 months later, Emma Matthews was officially part of David's family. The little girl who had been sleeping on cardboard in an alley had blossomed into a confident, happy child who called David Papa and considered Nathan not just a brother but her best friend. The trauma of her mother's death and her time on the streets had left scars that required counseling and patience, but Emma's natural intelligence and loving spirit had emerged as she felt safe and secure. She excelled in school, formed friendships with other children, and brought a special sweetness to the Matthews household that enriched all their lives. David often reflected on that snowy Christmas Eve when a routine walk to his car had changed 3 lives forever. Finding Emma had reminded him that success is not measured only in business achievements, but in the love and security we can provide to those who need it most. Nathan had gained not just a sister but a deeper understanding of compassion and generosity, and David had discovered that his capacity for love was far greater than he had imagined, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as responsibilities we never expected to carry. Emma's favorite part of their new life was the family tradition they established of volunteering at the homeless shelter every Christmas Eve, serving meals and distributing gifts to people who found themselves without homes during the holidays. She never forgot where she had come from, and her experience had taught all of them that everyone deserves dignity, kindness, and the chance to be part of a loving family. The Christmas Eve discovery that had begun with a child sleeping on cardboard had become a reminder that miracles often come not as supernatural interventions, but as opportunities for ordinary people to show extraordinary kindness when someone needs it most.